Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and on Here We Are, we invite local people to come on and talk to us, tell us their stories, so that we can hear what's going on, what they're interested in, what they get involved in. And today, on Here We Are, we have Alan Blackwell. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It's great to be here.
We're really glad to have you on the show today. Alan Blackwell was born and raised in New York City. He studied art to a great degree, and he also traveled widely and studied calligraphy in China as one of the many places he went to and the things that he did. He's lived in Brattleboro for a little over 10 years, and he owns and operates 2 back-to-back bars in downtown Brattleboro, Metropolis and Arkham, which are on Elliott Streets and go right through to Harmony Place. You, as I said, were born and raised in New York City. Big city. You did a lot of stuff when you were there. You were in school studying art.
Yep. I realized I was loving playing with artwork and learning about how to draw since probably about 3rd grade. And I would just always be in the art room and playing around, and that was absolutely my passion for a very long time. Yeah. And
it carried through into college?
Absolutely, yeah. I wound up at art school, and when I would start a program, when I started the program I was in, and realized I could be in the studio all day long and just drawing and painting was I was in my very happy place.
Yeah, I'll bet. It's kind of mind-blowing, right, to realize that you're doing and practicing exactly what you want to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's great. And so you get through school, you graduate from college, and what do you do after that?
Well, right as I was finishing up school, I got the opportunity to travel to Beijing a couple times for 5 weeks each, and that was pretty incredible. I got to go through school and study calligraphy with a calligraphy master in Beijing. And all through school, my specialty with painting was using inks and brush on paper or rice papers. So that was very much a dream come true, to be able to be there and study artwork and the specifics of how form and brush strokes are handled. Yeah.
And did you feel like that's where you were traveling toward? Because there's such an immediacy to calligraphy. You know, it's a one-shot deal, pretty much, right?
Exactly.
And you have to be. There's such a contemplative piece to it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Wow, where do I start? I guess I can even start with just the positioning of how you hold your brush. It's really important. Wrist form and the amount of pressure your brush applies to the paper. It all affects the stroke and how the ink is applied and the eventual marks. And I was just fascinated with the entire process. And so for me to be there and to be able to learn the processes that have been thousands of years in the making, and as a new art student who was just kind of playing around, to really get tried and true experience was pretty incredible.
Yeah, and you're working with a master, you said?
Yeah.
How did you get an entry there?
It was actually a fairly simple process. The guy was just this really, really sweet man who was just happy to teach people, even if they weren't, there were people in my class who had no art experience, and he was just as happy to teach them as he was the folks of us who were there to learn from him and loved the artwork, and yeah.
So you were doing that while you were in Beijing, and you were living in Beijing.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about the experience of going from one mega metropolis to another?
Sure.
And then, of course, the third metropolis.
Right, well, yeah. Gosh, Beijing we were put up in these fairly nice hotels and things, and we were given bicycles to get to and from the campus every day. Chinese traffic is pretty intense. So, and I used to have long dreadlocks back then, and there aren't a lot of darker people in Beijing, so there were a lot of double takes. People would be in their cars and be very distracted seeing this really tall dreadlock guy riding his bike down the street, and so that was a little intense when like bus drivers would look and point and like veer off course a little bit and stuff. Like, but
you're literally stopping traffic, right?
yeah, a little bit
Wow.
sometimes. But it was so much fun. I mean, I just got to experience the city in a way that I never expected. And I fell in love with it there. It was so much fun.
You did?
Yeah. I got to meet a bunch of Chinese nationals who I formed some really amazing friendships with. I became really good friends with a couple guys who work on the Great Wall, who sit out there and they make artwork, ironically, and they make these marble carvings and paintings and they sell them to tourists.
Oh, wow.
And I wound up becoming really good friends with two of these guys. The language barrier was a bit of a challenge. I was very, very new to Mandarin, which is, for me, was brutally hard to try and pick up. And a real shining moment for me when I was there was one night we were all out at a restaurant, and two of these guys told each other a joke, and I started laughing at the punchline, and everyone just kind of stopped and looked at me, and I didn't realize what had happened, and I was like, what's going on? And they were like, did you just get that? I was like, oh, I think I did. And I could understand it. I couldn't speak it. I didn't have the Mandarin to be able to respond, but it was so wild to be able to understand it.
That's
for the
so
first
interesting
time.
because it's something. It's like getting steeped into you. You know, you're picking it up and not even knowing that you're picking it up.
Right.
You know, much the way even with calligraphy, I would think. You know, as you're doing the brush strokes, you know, there's less and less thought involved, perhaps, and then it just flows a lot more easily.
Yeah, it's very easy to just enter into a place where you get to turn off almost like the cognitive side of your brain and just focus, and that's what I've always loved most about painting is that when I'm really like in the place, in the zone, whatever, I can, like, hours can go by and you don't even realize at all, and to just be able to focus on the marks on the page and what shape should fit into the next is just, it's really beautiful, and it's kind of comforting in a way to just be able to narrow your focus and let that be your entire universe in the time that you're working, where nothing else matters. You don't need to think about bills or things that are coming up. You just get to focus on just the images and the shape of the marks and how much ink is on my brush. And
Yeah. Well, it's yes. I think it's something that we all sort of yearn for in our own ways. You know, to love something that much and to be so immersed that time doesn't matter at all. You're out of space and time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a zone, and it's one that we all love. So you went to Beijing more than once, is that correct?
Yeah, I was there 3 times. There was something really humbling about being in Beijing where so many of the basics of society and how things were laid out and set up were just extremely different, and it was an unknown. And so to be so wildly out of my element, it was an amazing challenge.
Yes.
To roam around and try and get a true sense of it.
Yeah, and a feel for yourself too, I would think, in the midst of that. That would be very, I mean, that's the kind of situation where it's either extraordinarily disconcerting or it kind of just brings you right in to yourself. Yeah,
it scared a lot of my friends who were there. It was, they were very, very uncomfortable with the level of, with being the other, you know? It doesn't happen to people very often here. I mean, I think it happens to some people more than others, but to be somewhere else where you're very much the outsider and easily spotted as that is pretty intense, and I feel like it's something that everyone should go through in some way or another. In like a very like interesting way for myself and a couple other minorities who were there on the trip with me. It was the first time that we had been somewhere where stereotypes that were had about us specifically had nothing to do with the stereotypes that have been put on us here in the States, which was kind of fascinating and never anything that we were warned about or told about. It was really interesting. So like people thought I knew like Yao Ming because I'm a big guy, so of course I would know the star Chinese basketball player. And, and everyone thought that because we were, well, a lot of people thought that like because we were in China, we were rich because we could afford to go there. And I was like, no, no, we're not. And people just didn't believe it. So
Mm-hmm.
it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You realize how big the world is.
Yeah.
Right. When it comes to
Absolutely.
something like that,
Mhm.
and how we each hold to our own cultural divides and our own
Yeah.
labels for people and the way we see them.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, because of course, you know, a lot of Chinese people coming over here would be the minority, right? You know, and we have, you know, we can just look at ourselves and see what our response is to that, you know, and I'm
Right.
sure it's very similar.
Right.
People are pretty much the same all the world around, right?
Yeah, we're all just people. We all just want to be happy and comfortable and enjoy and laugh and love and
Right.
you know, all
Yeah.
those fun things.
I know, that's all basic stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. One would think we would come together a little bit more, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wish we would. It would be lovely.
Yeah. When
Yeah.
you were out of your comfort zone, and it was for an extended period of time as well. It wasn't just, you know, a quick trip back and forth.
No.
How do you think that helped you or shaped you or influenced you?
It taught me a little bit about, I guess I felt like I had a little more worth in myself than I did before I went. I learned that I could exist in the world on my own and didn't have to have, you know, the support from family and friends that I didn't even know. Not that I didn't want that, because I do, I love that, but like to be on my own in such a new place and to do well and enjoy it and make friends and make like lasting friendships. It really made me feel like I was a bit more powerful and competent than I thought, than maybe I gave myself credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and
Yeah.
again, it's what you said before: is putting yourself on the edge, putting yourself out there.
Right.
You find out things about yourself you never would have otherwise. Yeah. Yeah.
And just on that also,
Yes?
I also kind of realized that I had a really big love for going out and discovering some of the like off the wall and off the beaten path places. So I kept finding myself like walking down these like really little like alleyways and side streets that like were not major tourist spots that I, you know, was probably feeling more comfortable than I should have in some of these places, but because of it, I found amazing art stores and galleries, and I was able to find some of the most delicious food I've ever tasted.
Yeah.
And just, so yeah, to put myself out there and like accept, you know, a level of risk from it, I was able to find some really, really cool spots.
I'll bet. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And again, you know, it's having the courage really to do that, to put yourself out there and go in
Right.
strange places.
Right.
So bring it back to Brattleboro. Just, you know, quickly, how did you get to Brattleboro? So you're in China?
I was in China, and I was finishing up school, and the lady I was seeing at the time finished school as well, and moved here to work at the retreat.
Oh, there you go.
And asked if I wanted to follow, and I had to decide between Beijing and Brattleboro, and so I, you know, looked up Brattleboro on the map and had to see where it was, and wound up just putting a bunch of my stuff in a bunch of bags and
Wow.
hopping on Amtrak and just coming up to just try something new.
Again, putting yourself out of your comfort zone
Yeah,
in a little bit of a
exactly.
different kind of way.
In a little bit more of a comfort place, because, you know, Brattleboro is a little more, a little easier to approach than Beijing was.
Yeah. You opened Metropolis first. And can you talk a little bit about, well, first of all, you've got a little superhero thing going on here.
Yeah.
And if you, both of Metropolis, which I had never thought of before, being Superman's hometown, right?
Yep.
And Arkham, which is out of Lovecraft fiction.
Out of Lovecraft.
Primarily.
Yep, but
Yeah.
also out of the Batman comics.
Batman too,
where,
yes,
it was
right.
the insane asylum in the Batman comics.
Yes.
Yep.
Talk about comfort zones, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, it worked for me. I've been reading comics my whole life, and just a big old comic book nerd. I've had a lot of fun reading comics and graphic novels,
Yep.
and drawing superheroes and all of that, like my whole life. So comic theme just kind of made the most amount of sense.
Yeah. If you could just take a minute to describe a little bit. First of all, I think the idea of you having 2 bars is kind of interesting. And how did you come to that?
Metropolis was a really, really amazing start, and it's gone through several different variations over the years. And it was about four or 5 years ago that the space right behind it opened up, and it was presented as an option, and it was like, oh man, okay, could make a new bar right here, and it would be tiny and weird and a hole in the wall, but like that could kind of work for it. And I've always, I've definitely always had this dream of opening a place that was just going to be like a little eclectic, artsy dive that would just be comfortable to, really anybody, but a place that was unpretentious and inviting and comfortable and inexpensive without sacrificing any of the friendliness or cleanliness or openness that you would want. And honestly, Brattleboro is the best place in the world for that, because the people here are just incredible and so wildly varied and complex.
And so your work as a bartender and having a public place, and especially after coming out of, not that you weren't in public, but the more contemplative side of yourself, working with art and that solitary work, and now being in the public and actually serving the public, serving the community and your clientele in a way, are two, again, it seems like a couple different sides of you that are coming out.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an odd balance for me sometimes, because I really do love people, and I like getting to know people and talking and meeting. And at the same time, I can be a very, very private person, and there's a lot to me that I don't like go out of my way to share. So those things are kind of at odds with each other sometimes. But I find that when I'm working, when I'm at my bar or bartending at it, I'm so very comfortable just wanting to engage people and find out, what makes them tick, and all of those excuse me, all of those like subtle social cues that you kind of have to be looking for. I'm fascinated with that side of it, and I like trying to figure people out and gauge what's next if I can. And
having a curiosity about, whoever walks in the door, you don't know who's going to walk in the door and sidle up to the bar, and start talking. And I'm sure that you hear a lot of stories.
Oh, yeah. Oh, tons. And another thing that's fascinating about Brattleboro is there have been so many times, especially early on when I moved here, where someone would come up to the bar and they would be in, just working clothes. They'd be in overalls and covered in mud or paint or whatever. And I'd be like, oh, okay, this person is a farmer. And then I'll have a conversation and be like, oh, you make parts for NASA? What? And so there are all these moments where it's like, okay, I just was assuming a little too much. And I need to rein that back, because the complexity of people here is amazing. And I know that's everywhere, but there's something unique about Brattleboro in that you just never know what to expect from people.
It's interesting, yes. Lips are deceiving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lips are deceiving. And you're getting an interesting little microcosm, too, of people who, you're not dealing with a huge population, for one thing.
Right.
And so I'm sure that you see people over and over again as regular clientele, which is great,
Maybe once or twice, yeah.
And so, I was wondering, that you had a vision, for how you saw your bar, and then your next bar as well, and so you create spaces around that vision, and it also, you've also got the other, talking about balance. You also have the need for them both to be viable businesses. Right. And so there's kind of that balance, I would think, would be going on all the time. Like your vision, you've got the vision has happened, but you have to there's upkeep with that too, in a lot of different ways. But you've created the space. So how is that balance for you?
Oh, geez. The bar business margins are razor thin. It is really intense. So, in terms of that, people ask me often, like, oh, should I start a bar? I'm like, well, yeah, maybe, but, it's not going to be easy. It's a lifestyle. You have to just devote your life to it in a very major way, where, things can go wrong at 10 a.m. or at like 3 a.m.
Right.
And, those are just part of what it means to be in it. And you're dealing with an industry where you are providing a service that can also represent a vice or an outlet, whether it be good or bad, and it's a social environment, and it just happens to be a very small bar, so like not everyone is adept at picking up on others' social cues if they're uncomfortable. So like there are all of these social dynamics that kind of compound on each other and can exist all at once. And so for me to delve into those is really satisfying and exciting to try and like balance them out and smooth out situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, every day you're walking into something different.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
And also the fact that you're, you are creating a community there. You're creating your own community, even though people are coming and going a lot, and I'm sure you get tourists coming in there as well, and visitors.
Absolutely.
But when people walk in, they're walking into something that you've created. They're walking into your world and your community, and not just you, obviously, but you're the ringleader.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't even really look at myself as that. I consider myself just one of the team, and I have such admiration and respect for the folks I work with. They're all pretty incredible, and I wouldn't be able to do it without them. But the community side of it as well, it's humbling sometimes when I sit back and look at it. I mean, I can rattle off the number of relationships that have started and met, and first dates that have led to more, that have led to marriages that started at my place, and where I can remember like first dates where I was like joking around with people and helping, and maybe not helping, but like, just being present for it. And that was, it's a pretty amazing feeling to know. And the community side of it is potent, and it, it's kind of like anything, I guess, where, there's also like negative things that happen, and there's this tendency for the negative people of the world to sometimes be the loudest. But then occasionally someone will say something really, really sweet and nice about something that I never even would have really like remembered doing, or a situation that happened, and how it'll just mean so much to someone. And it gets you, oh, sorry, I have to microphone. It gets you right in the feels. Definitely.
And it's great to have that feedback too, and also necessary, I would think, for you to be able to acknowledge that, and appreciate the fact that people are appreciating you and what you've created.
Right. And I love the feedback, good or bad. Like, I want to hear it.
Right.
I like hearing it.
Better to know, right?
Yeah,
than
always.
to not know. And so you've created this place for people basically to come to de-stress. It's a bar, you have food, you have especially in Arkham, you've got the games that people can come in and play. And so where do you go to de-stress?
Where do I go?
Where do you go to de-stress,
I mean, often I will actually go to Arkham, because so many of my friends are there, and I get to
that's great.
Chat and socialize. And then, I mean, this may sound a little cheesy, but I really, really enjoy spending time with my fiance and just hanging out and being easy, and fishing or biking or just like lounging around and watching a movie can do a lot for me.
You had gotten Metropolis going, it had gotten off the ground, things were going pretty well, and then you had this whole health thing come about.
Yeah.
So, Can you talk to us a little about that and how that
Sure.
impacted everything?
Over the last 5 years, I've had 5 different ankle surgeries that started with just a tiny little bone spur that needed to be taken out. And then this past January, I elected to have this final surgery where I wasn't willing to just try for something to possibly work again. So I got a below the knee amputation, and I'm so happy I did it, and almost wish I had done it sooner because it's just really just changed my life. I'm like more or less pain-free, and I'm able to do more now. I've been jogging, which I've never done before in my life, but I can do it now, which is kind of cool.
It's amazing, yes.
I always thought like running was just when you like run away from stuff, you know, not like just for fun. Yeah, it's been really interesting. And now I have this awesome new foot toy that I get to play with, and it's pretty fun. You want me to show it again?
Sure.
All right.
I didn't see it the first time. Yeah.
Can't pull it all the way up, but
This is
you know,
amazing.
it's pretty wild.
Yeah.
It's
That's incredible. That's like
it's a carbon fiber base with titanium rod and fancy
incredible.
ankle foot, and yeah.
can't help but say, you know, it's a superhero kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was debating RoboCop for Halloween. I don't know.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and kids, I'm sure, are fascinated by it.
Oh,
you know?
kids love it.
Yeah.
All summer when I'd be in shorts, I'd be in the grocery store or something, and kids would just like yank on their parents, be like, look at that, he's a part robot. I'd be like,
wow.
So much fun.
Because that's their interpretation, of course. That's so interesting,
And they
isn't it?
loved it. And it was the parents who'd be like, oh, stop it, don't do it. And it's like, no, it's fine. Like, I'm happy to, you know, I'm not hiding it. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm like, it's just a part of life.
Well, it's your attitude that makes it great, you know. I mean, not everyone would respond that way.
Yeah, I guess
and
that's
also,
fair.
you know, having come through that and out the other side, and to realize, you know, that life can still be incredibly sweet, you know, after going through something that difficult. And especially with pain, with that kind of chronic pain, that's a tough thing. So to be freed of that, I would think would be incredibly liberating.
Yeah, it feels like I'm aware of how much of a new chapter in life I've entered into.
Yeah.
And now, you know, I get to hit the ground running and just take it one step at a time and put my best foot forward, and I just put my pants on one leg at a time.
Yeah, that's so great. That's great, Alan. This is so much fun. I would love to talk longer. It would be great.
Yeah, I would love it.
Someday maybe we'll make it an hour show. We'll see.
Cool.
Yeah, it's so wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on and
thank
sharing.
you for having me.
Yeah, sharing these really great stories.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. So stop in Metropolis and Arkham, the back-to-back bars in Brattleboro, right around the corner. Thank all of you for being with us today. It was wonderful to be here again. It's such a great opportunity to meet people like Alan in the community and to hear the stories that you never know. You know, each one of us has at least 10 zillion stories, I think, and just to be able to get to hear a few of them and share them is just such a wonderful thing. So thank you. Tune in again next week. We will be here with Here We Are.